maybe a little more.
Hey, welcome to Thursday edition of Detroit in Black and White. I'm Adolph Mongo. Joining me today is Allan Lengel. It's the first time, and Trenton downriver, Allan, from Deadline Detroit.
Almost. I'm in Detroit still, but my heart's in Trenton.
Okay. Jim Nardone, he's a fixture around Trenton. You know, you come in, you're a rock star here. We at Ramsey's here on West Jefferson. How you doing, Jim?
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
And we have, once again, former state senator and candidate for Congress.
It's good to be here. Thanks
for having me. Adam Hollier. Now, listen, pronounce your name, because everybody says it's different. Now, right from the horse's mouth.
O-L-E-A.
Okay, Hollier. Okay.
Yep. H is silent. I-E-R makes an H sound. It's French.
How often did teachers butcher your name?
In school, my teacher pretty much learned it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
School, sports. But you know,
what's the origin of that? What's the origin of that name?
My grandfather's family's Creole.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Yep. So those Louisiana roots.
No question. Well, right. This your second time around.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you're gonna do different.
Well, I think the biggest thing that is different about this race versus 2 years ago is there are not 8 other Black candidates in this race. And I think that was the defining characteristic in the race 2 years ago. The Black vote was just way too split up, but also time. You know, Brenda Lawrence announced her retirement at the beginning of January. 2 years ago, I got into the race at the end of January. This time I got in the race at the beginning of October. So I had an entire extra quarter and we were able to do a lot more. So at this point, I've raised significantly more money than I was able to and have way more supporters, right? So I have more people who are signed up saying yes today at this moment than I did at the end of the race 2 years ago.
Go ahead, Allan.
I was going to say, last time, did you try to convince people to drop out? And have you convinced people this time to stay away?
I don't think that there's anything a candidate can do to say to someone else, no, this isn't your time. But I think there are a lot of things that you can do from an infrastructure standpoint that make it more difficult for people to run. So, 2 years ago, there were some very clear efforts by a variety of individuals in the community to make sure that we did not have the kind of split that ultimately ended up happening. And some of those were just unsuccessful. I think this time there were more folks who were recognizing that we needed to be more united. And I was able to work those individuals, folks like Brenda Lawrence, who had a different candidate last time, are with me. Folks like Mayor Bang, who had a different candidate last time, right? Like there are a bunch of people who chose somebody else 2 years ago and they chose me. And that's why I was willing to get into this race.
Why do you think Mary Waters jumped into this race?
I can't speak to anybody else's motivation. You should talk to her and do the same. But I think when I think about a race, I think about, can I win this race? Can I do a good job? And I think all of those things are true, right? We've put together the kind of team that allows us to do that. We have a lot of support, right? More than a dozen state reps and state senators, the Speaker of the House, the Secretary of State, the Chair of the County Commission, the county, the CEO. Like all of those things really do matter. I mean, I've got a number of city council members in Detroit, city council presidents from across the district, mayors, right? Like this race was about putting together a coalition of people who want to be represented by somebody who's going to do this right.
Jim, yeah.
I do. I see the senator everywhere, right? He's out in the community all the time. And I don't think that's the guy you're running against. He has a different approach to politics. So I think it's important to tell the viewers your story from the beginning, from your dad, from your mother. I wish you would just cover that so the people that are watching can understand where you came from and where you're trying to go.
Yeah. So my dad was a Detroit firefighter. My mom was a social worker. And when we grew up talking about politics in our household, it was very different than you see people talk about politics now, right? Like my dad was talking about, do they have the equipment to go in and save people's lives? Do they have the training to come out safely? My mom was working on systems to make sure that when people came in, that they weren't just taken care of that day, but that they could come out of themselves, right? That they could come out and have the things that they need to change their lives. Because too often our social safety network is like, all right, you're not drowning anymore. You got food for today, but it's not helping somebody go to a place where they don't need food assistance anymore, where they don't need cash assistance, where they can pay for childcare, where they can do some of those things. And so that's why I got into this. You know, I went to Cornell. I have a master's from University of Michigan in urban planning. I was a volunteer firefighter in college. I played 2 sports. I did 2 terms in the Michigan Senate. I worked in Mayor Bing's administration as the liaison between the city council and the mayor, and had an opportunity to learn.
So you know the issues of the community.
Yeah,
because you live in the community.
I absolutely do. I live in the same neighborhood I was born and raised in. I went to public schools. My daughter goes to public school. My son will be going to public school next year, right? Like, I have a vested interest in this district and my community, right? I learned how to drive here. I went to elementary school here, and this is where I raised my family.
What high school did you go to?
I went to Renaissance. Renaissance.
And when you say you know what the issues are in the community, what are people telling you now? Like, why they say, if I vote for you, this is what I want you to do. What are they telling you they want you to do?
I mean, people want that American dream that I think was always promised. And when I think about what that is, it's very much so. They want to have stable housing, right? The reason people don't feel like the economy is as strong as it is because they got a job, but they can't buy that new place, right? Like, they can't buy the dream home. They can't do the things to get into stable housing. They still have a roof leak. They still have all these challenges with housing. And that's the overwhelming issue for most folks. It's not the thing that you see at the top of the ticker on CNN, but if you're out in community, if you're out talking to folks, that's what they're doing. They're trying to figure out how they can pay rent, right? When we talk to schools and they're talking about absenteeism, it's because kids are moving from one home to the other. Evictions have just started back up in the city of Detroit, right? Like, there are a lot of real challenges that people are facing when it comes to housing.
And then you're talking about people getting their water shut off, don't have electricity, etc. Now, I want to say something about the incumbent congressman, who's my congressman,
your favorite.
I don't even like to say his name. I was district manager at one time for the late Barbara Rose Collins. Mm-hmm. So I understand how congressional offices work. You get a lot of folks calling, they got issues, etc. But I had never seen another incumbent congressperson, Rashida Tlaib, said, you know what? My office is overwhelmed with people from his district because they're not taking care of business. You get elected, how are you going to change that perception overnight that we got to carry the load of another congressional office?
Well, you have to invest in these things. You also have to have relationships with these other the individuals, right? People all the time call the wrong office because they don't know where these district lines are.
Right.
But the way you deal with that is you have a relationship and you say, hey, when I was in the state Senate, Stephanie Chang's district was right next to mine. There are some people who live in my neighborhood a block away, and they're like, oh, I thought you were my person. It's like, no, you're their person. You don't just say, all right, I can't help you, like, or whatever. You say, okay, I'm going to pass you along. We're doing warm handoff, but you got to have somebody there. So Rashida Tlaib, for example, has 20-some people working for her. Debbie Dingell, 20-some people. Haley Stevens, 20-some people, right? All doing constituent services, helping the residents. Shri Thanedar has like 3 people working in his office, and has had
why is that? Why wouldn't he have as many as
he spends his budget on mail, on the robocalls that you get, on the billboards. So members of Congress are completely in control of how they spend their money. He's chosen to spend his money on billboards instead of on people who can actually provide service.
And so, and you're absolutely right, because you remember Joe Nolenberg?
Yes, I do.
He was a Republican. But you could call Joe Nolenberg out of Detroit, and you got a problem. They didn't say, well, it's Conyers or it's Kilpatrick your person. He'll get it done, And I said that's the kind of person you want in office, Instead of don't you have a budget that you mail anyway? So why would you spend most of your budget on robocalls and on extra mailing?
Because Shri Thanedar is only committed to getting reelected and not about doing the job. And so I think you see that when you look at a guy who spent $22 million running for office, that is what is his priority. Feels like he can buy this seat. He feels like he can buy folks.
Well, at this time around, and before we get into it, let's take a break, Alan, and then we'll come back and continue this conversation.
The NFL Draft is coming to Detroit, and you can be there for free. Experience the ultimate NFL fan fest. Go to NFL.com/draft access. The NFL Draft, presented by Bud Light, April 25th through the 27th.
All right.
Okay. We didn't see it.
You didn't see it?
No.
The NFL Draft is coming to Detroit, and you can be there for free. Experience the ultimate NFL fan fest. Go to NFL.com/draft access. The NFL Draft, presented by Bud Light, April 25th through the 27th.
Did you see it?
Yeah. Okay, that was good. You know, the draft coming.
No, everybody's excited.
Yeah.
I got a couple things we're helping to do it in my neighborhood.
Okay. Now,
Somebody saw it twice.
Okay.
The ad did go through twice. And actually, Philo Farnsworth, who's not his real name, but he's involved in the film industry, says Adam was the initial sponsor of our tax credit bill for the film industry. So
when we gonna get the filming back here in Detroit, man?
Rep Jason Hoskins has taken over that bill package. They've had committees. I think they're going to get it done. I think it's been very clear that the incentives work. The state of Georgia literally just took our incentives, made a couple tweaks, and you can't watch any movie without seeing that Georgia peach for an egregiously long period of time at the end. And they made real investments, right? Like Tyler Perry Studios are all in Atlanta. The Marvel movies are all filmed in Atlanta, and so many other things because they made a system that worked. And they just copied it from us. Republicans came into office and were like, oh, we don't like that. Those are those Hollywood people. It's like, no, those are good, real paying jobs. They were labor jobs and they were local things. Now, we didn't get the full benefit of that investment because they pulled the rug out from under all those folks who invested. There are a bunch of people who invested in studios, who invested in the upskilling and all that work. But people were working. And you remember those movies were being filmed here, whether it was Transformers or Batman versus Superman, like big stuff was happening here.
Yep.
What
downtown?
Downtown
Detroit. We saw Ben Affleck. We saw a lot of.
When you don't see him now, you can see
Ryan Gosling. We saw a lot of people running around downtown Detroit.
You can thank Rick Snyder for running them out of Dodge. You got a question?
I was just going to say, when I came in here today, a couple of people said, well, who are you interviewing today? I said, Adam Hollier. And they said, well, we kind of know who he is. We don't know him well. We know who he is. And they said, I said, he's a younger man. They said, we need to change Congress. And these are people working in a restaurant. They're smart enough to know that it's time to turn the page.
Yeah.
And we need some younger people. We need some more energy.
I would certainly be the youngest member of the Michigan delegation. And so when we talk
how old
about
are you?
I'm 38.
38.
But I'm still a captain in the Army. I'm a paratrooper. So I'm jumping out of perfectly good airplanes and doing all the things associated with that. And so when we talk about being able to handle the rigors of the job and being able to move about, that's me all day.
What do 13th District residents need? Besides the lip service,
they need a good paying job, right? Like they need somebody who's going to bring investment into this community, something that I have a real track record of doing. My first week in office as a state senator, I got a call from Kathy Angerer, who at the time was the city manager in Hamtramck. And you'll remember that was when General Motors was announcing that they were closing the Poletown plant. And that was going to be thousands of jobs lost directly and millions of dollars lost by all of those factory workers no longer having a job, right? The restaurants, all the money that they spent, right? Like that was going to be a huge impact. My first week in office, I set up the first meetings with General Motors and government at any level. We met with the UAW, we met with MEDC and DEGC and city. We met weekly until we met monthly until they announced that was going to be factory zero. So when President Biden was announcing the bipartisan infrastructure bill, I was sitting front row center because when there were a bunch of other folks who wanted to protest and complain, I was in a meeting doing the work to make sure that billion investment happened in our community.
If the president going to come and campaign in Michigan, and I'm not saying that he's going to come and campaign directly for you, but do you think the president coming into the Detroit area or Detroit itself will get out to vote, motivate people to come out to vote?
I think we have to do everything we can to make sure that Black voters feel like their vote matters, because it does. And I know the president is going to be here a bunch, because he can't get reelected without Michigan, and he can't get reelected without Detroiters, and particularly with Black Detroiters, right? Like we are the linchpin, and we are going to be the difference maker in this race, which is why it's so important that Democrats have a Black member of our delegation, because right now the only Black member of the delegation is John James, and he is 1,000% pro-Trump, and that's not acceptable.
Let me ask you this: in the Black community, are you going to be campaigning for Biden, or is that a liability for you to campaign for Biden?
Voting is a multiple choice test, and I think that there is not a single Black voter that I know in the 13th Congressional District who wants any part of Donald Trump having 4 more years. And so the option is to make sure that Joe Biden gets reelected. Now, and I don't even want to say it as though it's all right, these are the worst of two evils. Joe Biden's been really good for Black voters, right? Black voters said, hey, we want student loan debt repair. It's like, great. Black voters were like, hey, we want good union paying jobs. Under the Biden administration, they've done tons to make sure that unions get a fair shake. That's why you see more on strike. That's why you see more representation. That's why you saw record deals with the UAW.
Why can't we hear that from Biden's people? You know, he got all these senior advisors who say who's getting paid mega bucks, and they can't even get that message out in the community. He got a vice president that, when she was the attorney general and the senator out of California, she was a hard ass. Now, look, what happened? You know,
let me tell you what Keith Ellison told me. Keith Ellison, the attorney general of Minnesota, former member of Congress, native Detroiter, sat down in my living room and told me he was supporting. And he said it is the job and the responsibility of an individual congressman to turn out their district. And so the reason that I am talking about President Biden that way is because I understand that that's a part of the job. Because if I don't do that work, nobody else is. And when President Biden got elected the last time, he used my campaign office, he used my space, and on election night, they called me down to the TCF Center when votes weren't being counted right. When Republicans were saying, banging on the glass door, saying, stop the count, doing those kind of things. You got to have a partner on the ground.
Have you been talking to our elected officials in Detroit and in the other parts of the district? What are some of the cities in the 13th?
So going east to west, all 5 Grosse Points, Harper Woods, the city of Detroit, Hamtramck, Highland Park. Then you get Lincoln Park, Allen Park, River Rouge, Romulus, Taylor, Wayne, Wyandotte, Southgate, Melvindale, and a portion of Dearborn Heights.
Adam, let me ask you this. Are you seeing, like in Grosse Pointe, are you seeing a lot of different issues than you are seeing in the city of Detroit? Is there a disparity like Allen Park to Detroit to Grosse Pointe, or is there a kind of a common theme of issues?
I mean, I think there are a bunch of very common issues, right? Housing continues to be incredibly expensive. And the reason we always talk about housing is because it's the biggest part of your wealth, right? As people talk about how the economy, how they're feeling, but also as we talk about schools, right? Where you live determines your school district, and schools are having a tremendous issue with funding because people can't afford to live in those communities, because people are having less children, because kids are so ungodly expensive. And this is coming from somebody who has a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. Right? Childcare is very expensive, and people are grappling with that all across the district as they are trying to figure out how they go back to work, whether or not they need to stay at home, and, you know, being caregivers. Right? I was talking to a constituent in Detroit not an hour ago as he was talking about the challenges of being a caretaker and taking care of, you know, caretakers, helping them get time. Right? Those are the kind of things that regular people are wondering about. I have an uncle who I help because they don't have children, right? It's been developed Parkinson's. He needs help. My aunt needs help. Like, those are kind of systems that our government used to provide. And he's a veteran, right? So when I was running the state Veterans Affairs Agency, there were moments where my aunt would call me and say, hey, Adam, like I'm having trouble doing this thing. And I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. I got you. Let me help you do this thing.
Most people don't have that connect.
I'm sitting at her house one evening, and it's, 11, 12 o'clock at night. We walk over, she lives a block away, and she's like, Adam, what do people do when their nephew doesn't run the state agency? I was like, entrepreneur, that's why I'm doing this, so that we can fix these problems, because there are a bunch of systemic problems that people have. When I started in my role 2 years ago, there were about 130,000 people who were connected to the state in some form with their veterans benefits. When I left, it was almost 280.
How are we dealing with the veterans? You know, you see these commercials on Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps.
Mhm.
If you got Camp Lejeune, listen, you know how many people went through Camp Lejeune, lived in North Carolina, and the message still not getting out to them.
And so that's why it was so important for us to do that kind of work. I think when people think about veterans, they were thinking about, you know, the white guy served during Vietnam, wearing, you know, member of the VFW. And there's so many other groups that we were not connected to, right? Women who serve do not consider themselves veterans the same way men who serve, whether they were in combat or not in combat, irrespective of the way that they serve. And so it was a big priority in my administration to kind of do that. And so Brian Love, who is the new director and a Marine, has taken over and has been building on that work, right? And so I think it's important for us to recognize that this is not something we're solving overnight. But we made a lot of progress in the 9 months that I was leading the agency.
How people get in touch with your campaign, and how can they donate or volunteer or whatever?
So you can go to adamhollier.com, which is ADAMHOLLIER.com. And you can get all the information you need to volunteer, to donate, to be invested. This is a campaign that's going to be about people, right? And the more we get folks to engage, the better we do it.
What about debates?
Hey, man, I'm down anytime, right? I would love for the news, the free press, everybody to have televised debates. I would talk about this race anytime and compare my record to Shri's anytime, any place.
Adam,
Go ahead.
I was going to, sorry, Jim. I was going to ask a quick question. You and Shri are basically the two main candidates running in the primary. Are you guys going after different groups of people, or are you competing for the same groups of people?
I mean, I want to get every voter in this district to say yes. I came in first or second in 90% of precincts 2 years ago, and recognize that I have a lot of ground to make up with folks, right? There are a lot of people who chose somebody else. And so I'm at churches every weekend. We were at E-Course on Easter Sunday with Pastor Miles, right? Like, I'm committed to being where I need to be. You know, we were in Wyandotte and Southgate, right? Like, the only way to win this thing is to make sure that people feel like they have a representative who is going to represent them. When I was in the state Senate, people were always like, oh man, your district's so weird. How do you represent folks in Grosse Pointe and in Hamtramck and the east side of Detroit? I would say with authenticity, with passion, and by doing everything that I possibly can to move the ball on their issues. There is no cookie cutter on what people need. You have to be present, and you have to listen, and you have to be able to do the work, right? Like, I got a call from a donor, a friend Saturday, right? She's a business owner in the district. That's how I met her. And she's like, Adam, my goddaughter, she's missing, right? And I don't put all her business out, but you know, she like that 14-year-old girl got into an Uber in the middle of the night, and they hadn't heard from her for a day. And then they finally talked to her, and then that her guard was supposed to come back, and she didn't. And so she's like, hey, we talked to the police. Can you try and figure something out? And I called all of my folks. I called the police chief in Detroit, the sheriff, my brother, right? Like, I called all those folks, and they called me right back, and they're like, hey, Adam, we have a special unit for this, right? So I want to give Chief James White a lot of credit, because they have a special unit to help folks who lose folks like this, right? Where, and they got her right back, right? Like, just like this.
Where was she at?
She was just some guy, but you know, a grown man, right? She's 14 years old, right? But those things can go wrong unless you have people who are going to work hard to solve these issues. And I think that's what's important about me in this seat, is understanding how to be connected with these fixtures of our community, right? Like these small business owners who are like, hey, I don't normally need anything, but can you help me on this?
Okay. Last question.
I thought it was important.
I got one after Jim, but go ahead.
Okay.
To know that this is about the primary. They have one chance to vote for you, and I think you can tell the people in Taylor and Allen Park and the Points and Detroit that they need to vote for you now. They can't wait till November.
Yeah.
And my other question to you is, I think you need it's just my thoughts. You need a collective. So I guess I like to ask you, if you're talking to Shri Gay, Dan Yogo, and you're talking to Portia Roberson, all those good folks that made the last election kind of a disaster collectively.
I've talked to every single person who was in the race 2 years ago, and I'm really grateful that none of them are in the race this time. And I think as we continue to work through, a lot of them have been helpful to this point, and I hope they will continue to be engaged in this race. But to your point, this is not a race that's going to be decided in August. I won on election day. Shri won because he won the early vote, and the early vote in Michigan is 2 out of every 3 people,
Right.
and that's going to be the last 2 weeks of June, which is why it's so important to get folks ready.
It's like going to a picnic. You don't go empty-handed. You gotta bring your own food with you, and that's what votes. That's what you'll support.
And if you want grandma's thing, you need to be there early because it's going to be gone.
The time is
right.
now.
Last question.
All right, let's play a commercial and then we'll go to the last question. How's that?
Okay,
The
go ahead.
NFL Draft is coming to Detroit, and you can be there for free. Experience the ultimate NFL fan fest. Go to NFL.com/draft access. The NFL Draft, presented by Bud Light, April 25th through the 27th.
So my question is, Adam, if you have to grade Shri Thanedar, what grade would he get as a Congress member and why?
I mean, he would get an incomplete because he's not doing the job. He doesn't show up, and he's made that his priority, right? Like I was at an event as a constituent, at the Congressional Black Caucus event last September, and every member of the congressional delegation talked about what they were most proud of, how they had helped, engage in the Black community, and Hillary Sholton was talking about Black maternal health. Shri Thanedar was talking about how he was helping people get passports. Like that's not what a district like this needs. Right?
No.
In a community where less than a third of people are ever going to have a passport, the idea that your number one takeaway, the thing you are most proud of, is you help people who had the resources and disposable income enough to plan a last minute trip abroad and to be like, hey, Congressman, can you get me my passport turned around? Right? Like if he had said, hey, I'm most proud because I help people stay in their homes, I'd be like, all right, that's a lot of respect. Right?
Well, you as a teacher, you've been assaulted because I give a F for failure. He flunked. He flunked politics 101. He got elected because of I call him a minority candidate. What he got? 26%, 27%. But you know what? This is another race. You don't take people for granted. We want to have you back on. Hey,
So Adam, one last thing. Adam, so you're basically saying his priorities are off as far as you're concerned.
And his ability to deliver on them, right? Like you have to, one, do the right assignments, and you have to do a good job at them. And he's done neither of those.
He can't even pronounce the name of the streets in his district. I'm sorry. I just can't give him no credit. He done killed 150 dogs. You can go find. That's how he made his money. Well, I ain't running for Congress, but I like Adam, and good luck, and we'll have you back. Thanks, Adam, for coming on today.
Thank
This
you.
is Thursday, Detroit in black and white. Thank you, Jim. Teresa, we'll be back next week, same time, and catch us on Saturday at 10 o'clock a.m. At McShane's.
Christine Caramo. Christine Caramo will be on.
We got your favorite candidate.
Wow.
State. Hey man, she called. She want to come on.
I'm sure it'll be very entertaining.
It will. We gonna have her. You know what, man? It's like this. They say the prodigal son come back. In the Black community, people leave, curse out the family, etc., and then they get in trouble. Where they go? They come back home, don't you? Listen, we gotta welcome them back.
We
all
allow
right?
hecklers at
No, we're not gonna let them help.
Better you than me.
We're not gonna help help with the sisters.
I think
let me do that.
That's what Republicans keep trying to do.
Yeah.
They keep trying to find Black folks and say that those are the ones that represent.
You know what? You can be a Republican, but you don't have to hate yourself. We'll be back next week. Thank you, Adam Hollier.